my notification that the meeting started?
Yeah, it is 6 o'clock. So, and I do think we have pretty much, I think we have a lot of our group here tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I always like to try to start as much on time as possible so that we don't run over at the end. We had one person in our group that was not here last time, and I'm looking for her name. She's not on yet tonight either. So if she gets on, I'll have her introduce herself to you. But otherwise, I think you all have met everyone from last time. So we're going to go ahead and start. So we have four presenters tonight. Actually, we'll start with George. George is our current county treasurer, and he's one of the folks that I asked to come and speak because he pays attention to these kind of things, has for several years. For open transparency, he's a Democrat, but that's not the only thing he does. So he has a lot of statistics and numbers. He's a good numbers guy. So let's hear what George has to say about why he thinks redistricting is important and what he thinks is important for us to consider in our thoughts about redistricting. So welcome, George.
Well, thank you, Darlene. Oh, you misspoke. You called me treasurer.
Oh, I'm sorry, auditor. Pardon me.
No, don't worry. Yeah, but I am a numbers guy. You're right about that, especially as numbers relate to tangible things like money, population, and votes. And I like maps, whether they refer to physical features or to political boundaries. I watched the last meeting with great interest. The contributions were interesting. Many issues were ones that I hadn't thought of, but then there are others that I have that are a little bit parallel. So I put my thoughts down into an Excel spreadsheet. I'd like to show you those, if I may share the screen. Let's see.
If you could, George, if you want to share the Excel spreadsheet with us after the meeting, we can post that as well.
Okay, I might have to clean it up a little bit, but we'll do that now. Do you see something that says number of seats in the upper left corner?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, I've got two spreadsheets up. This tab I call decision rules. And one criterion for the number of seats we have in the city council, on the county board, is how efficiently we arrive at decisions. Normally, you need a majority. And of course, to guarantee that you have a majority, if you had a full attendance, is to have an odd number. That way you never have a tie. But it can also, depending on the number and the properties of the number, it can be sometimes onerous to meet the 3/5 rule requirement or the 2/3 rule requirement. And so I made a little chart here showing a number of proposed seats on the county board, followed by the number required to have a majority, and then what portion of the whole that is, and then how much more you have than 50%. And then I did the same thing for what's required to get 3/5 majority. For example, if you have 6 people, 3/5 of that is, what is it, like 3.6. You need to get 4, and but that's actually 2/3, right? So so that's 11% more than 60%. So that's a little onerous if you had a very small number of seats of 9, excuse me. However, if you have a number of seats at 15, look at getting 3/5, all you need is 9, exactly 9. There's no overage. If you need 2/3, you need 10 people. Again, you need exactly 10. So there's no overage. So in broad terms, the greater the number of seats, the overage does decline. However, odd numbers have an advantage over even numbers. So we can see that with when currently we have 22 seats. To get a simple majority, you need 12, not 11.5. And so the overage is 9%. So why are we discussing this? I think if our goal is to avoid gridlock and to be decisive, then the optimal number of districts would be 15 or 19. 15 would be so because if I sum all the overages, I get 7%. That's the only one that sums to a single digit number. If you want to weight it for majority, because most of the time that's the kind of business you're doing, 10 is a nice majority out of 19. You need only 52.6% of 19, to have a majority, and that's only 5% more than 50%. So that leads to some other criteria. These are 15 and 19 are both odd numbers, which necessitate single member districts. We currently have 2-member districts. Multi-candidate districts, I misspelled insulate here. Multi-candidate districts insulate governance from wholesale change from a single election, like say a wave election, but it still involves total county participation. Every district elects, participates in the election, but they're only changing one of their 2 county board members typically. But single member districts can have electoral staggering like we do for the US Senate to prevent a wave election from ridding us of institutional knowledge. You just have to have some rule, like say odd number districts run in, everyone runs in 2022. Odd number districts run in 2024, and the even number districts get 4-year terms. And then that resolves itself at the end of the decade. So that's the thought I'd like to share with you on decision efficiency on the number, the optimal number of numbers. I beg your pardon? Was there a question or a comment? Okay, so that was one thing I thought of. Leanne Brehab Riley brought up population trends and how much districts can grow or decline in population over time, and discussed that we can track that by using the ESRI program, pulling in the best estimates for current population, laying them on the old districts. I think that this should not be a criterion whatsoever. Our own history is here in this orange graph. If you just look at the orange, that's the total population. The greatest difference between 2 districts, by my eyeing it, would be 8 as the largest. It's a little bit over 20,000, whereas District 2, this is not in order, and it's fuzzy. 2's right here. It's a little bit lower. It looks to me like you're saying by the end of the decade, the largest district had 20,700 people, and at the end of the decade, the smallest district had 19,000. So they differ by 8. I have a 1.089, basically 9%. But this represents the maximal deviation in a single pairing, and the average standard deviation would be much less. And then this kind of criterion, besides being fuzzy and totally approximate, does conflict with another criterion. So what do I have written here? If one were to try to have equal present populations as well as presumed future populations, one would be obliged to carve up communities of interest. My great example would be Rantoul when the air base was shut down. It would be absurd to say, well, 5 years from now, they're going to have lower population. That's akin to a British Rottenborough of the 19th century. So we have to make sure we add it, just grab some districts that have high population growth. So maybe in 5 years, they'll still be equal. You can see how onerous that would be. And then of course, population changes tend to occur in contiguous areas, and those are communities of interest, which brings me to my next topic, communities of interest. I hadn't thought about that.
George, are you going to move do you have different tabs? Because we're still on your first tab.
You are?
Yeah. Are you moving it to your population tab then?
The population tab has orange and yellow bars. That's not seen?
We still have the number of seats.
Oh, really? That's too bad.
Did you click on the population tab at the bottom? I don't know if that's.
Oh no, I'm looking at it as I speak. So I'll give it to you real soon, but I think maybe I should unshare and then reshare, and we'll share in real time. What do you think? Is that the way to do it?
Yeah, I think share the desktop rather than sharing the document.
Why? Oh, was there a choice on there? Okay, I need to double click on, thanks, Brian. I need to double click on, what do I do here? I can see my whole, you know what I think? Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I know what you're talking about. All right, how do I get out of this? Hit the Zoom. Okay, meeting controls. Let me bring, oh, there it is. I see what you're doing. You are now sharing. Sorry about that. What do you see now?
We see a little line.
I can't hear
It's
you.
not even your whole Excel spreadsheet.
Okay, your screen is being paused. Why? It's being paused. Gosh. I'm going to drag my
Maybe
spreadsheet.
just close it. Maybe just close it and get your other page up, George. That would,
Do you see?
yeah,
the-
there you go. Yep, that's
Okay.
yellow lines. Yep.
All right. I'm going to be turned to my right, so pardon that. Yeah, here we go. I was saying the orange bars here indicated the end of the decade population in the beginning of the decade districts. So District 2 right here lost a little population compared to 20,000, whereas District 8 gained a little population. And I'm just saying the maximal difference, eyeballing it, seems to be no more than 9%. And of course, that's much greater than the average deviation would be. So I'm saying that to try to project population in the future is very approximate. And if you did it correctly, you would probably be carving up communities of interest, and that would conflict with the definite criterion. So I think the whole purpose of having the census and the redistricting is to recalibrate for population change. There's no reason to project population change. We should just use actual 2020 census data alone when it comes to sizing the districts equally. The example I used was Rantoul. I did that verbally. I don't think you need the graph for that. Okay, communities of interest, and this is just text to keep me succinct here. One advantage of uniting communities of interest is that it insulates them from localized turnout swings. Oh, you know what? There's more to this, darn it. I wanted to put this one at the top. Here we go. Cut and put this here. Insert cut cells. Yeah. If, let's say, when it comes to communities of interest, one community of interest would be the academic community or campus town. If campus town, let's say we had 15 districts, were to have three verging on 4 seats of its own, that would politically insulate the academic community from strong vicissitudes in student turnout. And I think that's important because, here we go on line 3. If student turnout plummeted, still future candidates would be incentivized to represent concerns of the academic community rather than, say, a portion of that district that was radially extended outward. The other part of the community might be, the candidate might be more responsive to that based on a low turnout election. And of course, that might reverse itself, but the candidate wouldn't know that. So, so how am I putting this? Let's see. This is the least organized tab. I can guarantee you that part. Turnout in campus precincts has ranged from 5,000 in the 2014 midterm to about 12,000 in the 2016 presidential. So you can see that those vicissitudes exist. While the contribution to the county as a whole would be one person, one vote, the representation of the county board, I think, could be more cogent and coherent by having distinctly academic districts. And this is my last thought. I think that keeping precincts intact is an important criterion as much as you can do it, because it prevents confusion in both voters and those conducting the vote. If you cut a jurisdiction between two neighbors on the same side of the street and in the same block, they may be having nice conversations, but not realizing that they don't even have the same set of candidates to vote from. But also in the interest of keeping the elections accurate, when you split precincts, you have to create different ballot configurations, and then those multiply as you cut up precincts. And then of course you do make mistakes. We've had individuals get the wrong ballot before. So I think keeping precincts intact as much as possible is a pretty reasonable criterion. And that's all I have to share tonight.
Okay, questions for George? He covered a lot there.
Sorry.
I think it's good if we have your table, George, so we can keep track, because that was a lot. That
You
was
like
a
it?
lot.
Oh, okay. Let me get that table back up. I almost hit leave meeting. I don't mean
No,
to
that's
do-
what I mean for you to pass out later with our handouts.
Oh, okay.
We'll have it with our handouts.
Tricia
So
has
does
it.
anybody have any discussion or questions that they want to do with George while he's here?
Oh, George, Lynn Warfel, did you ever try to look deeper into the various communities of interest? There's approximately 10 major parts to the county government, for example, and of those 10 major parts, the different communities of interest weigh them very, very differently. Have you looked at it from that standpoint?
I'm not sure what you mean. Are you saying,
Well, just for one example, roads. Roads mean a whole lot more to the county rural people than they do to the students.
oh, no, I realize. No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the districts, all I'm saying is that people who value roads should be together so that their county board candidate understands their concerns. That's a general principle. The representation comes from a candidate who has a coherent set of issues to advocate for, right?
Yeah.
So I happen to bring up academic continuity only because I think that changes in turnout can be insulated, and that's a little bit different issue. But when it came to community, I would have to. That's interesting to me that you say there are 10 communities of interest. I haven't seen that particular.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Well, like highways, it would be one, roads, taxes, another one, justice, another one. Those various big chunks of the county.
Yeah. That's. But the districts can't be drawn to represent geographies that have a particular interest in a leg or an arm of the county government. The communities of interest tend to be geographical. They might correlate to a branch of government, but I would think that it tends to be the community itself.
So that's interesting of looking at it. I guess we have to decide, how do we want to look at our communities of interest? How would we define that? So it's been defined in one sense. For example, it could potentially be racial ethnic communities. It could be geographic communities. It could be people that have shared interests kind of communities, which is what you're suggesting, I think, Lynn. So I think we need to, that'll be a good conversation for our next meeting, is to talk about what are potential communities of interest and how do we want to define those in terms of the weights that we're giving them in our mapping.
Okay.
So good question. And people have different, I think, different viewpoints about that. So it's good if we can decide as a group how we want to evaluate that.
Right.
Anything else from George?
I had a question. It's the decision of the county board how many districts there are going to be and how many members from each district. Is that correct? And that has to be a decision made before any kind of other redistricting decision.
Sure.
Well, technically, yeah. So yes, the county board will make that decision. As I said last meeting, I was hoping they could do that by the end of February. I think it'll probably be, I actually gave them direction no later than the end of March, because I think they need a little time to talk about that. And we need time also. If we have input to give them, we should be giving it to them now. And they don't, they only meet once a month for their committee of the whole and then once a month for their full board. So it will take them, I think, at least 2 months to come up with that decision, but I could be wrong. They might be really fast. I see that Shri has joined us. You are the new person, Shri. You're the only one that wasn't at our meeting last time. So we all went around the room and introduced ourselves briefly last time, just who you are, a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this. And so if you wouldn't mind doing that just for a couple minutes, we'd all like to meet you.
Yeah. Hey, Darlene. Hi, everyone. My sincerest apologies for missing the first meeting. Things kind of came up with work. So I've been here in Champaign for about 2 years now. I'm working for a medical device startup. We are based out of Research Park on the U of I campus, but I am originally from the East Coast. I did my undergrad at Virginia Tech, and I've kind of traveled quite a bit and moved around while working with individuals with disabilities, primarily in the prosthetics and orthotics side of disability. So the physical disabilities and limitations. And so this was kind of through a friend / kind of a colleague friend of mine who I got connected with, Darlene, and I thought it'd be a really cool opportunity to be a little bit more involved within the county level because it's a unique perspective of something that happens not very frequently, but I happen to be here at the time where we're looking at redistricting.
Well, thanks for joining our group. So as Sheree was mentioning, it's no problem if one of you can't make it to one of the meetings. We are trying to take notes of the meetings so that you have some idea of what we accomplished. And then of course, if there's any handouts or reading or anything, everybody will have access to that. So I realize it's really difficult to get 15 people together. We actually have 13 group members and then 2 administrative assistants and myself. So it's hard to get that many people together for a meeting. Even if we do it on a regular basis, which this isn't quite regular yet. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We have a great turnout for our second meeting as well. So yeah, Sheree, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I had a question. You said next meeting we can discuss going over how we want to define our interest parties. Is that something that we have like potential involvements for before that we can look over? Something like
Sure.
you mentioned
Yes.
the various options.
Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the way we've done these couple meetings is we have some presenters to talk about things that they're interested in or things they think we should consider. And this just gives us a little orientation about the kinds of things redistricting is about. And then the group will move more probably into discussion in future meetings because then we'll have more knowledge about what to discuss. Okay, thanks for the question. All right. Any other things for George? Okay, thank you, George, for coming tonight and sharing your thoughts with us and also your spreadsheet with us. And you're welcome to just stay and listen to the rest of the meeting if you'd like to while you're here. So our next speaker tonight, our next presenter is going to be Bradley Yukin. Brad is the director, I don't even know your official title, Brad, executive director of the Champaign County Farm Bureau. And he has a different viewpoint. But he was involved with this process 10 years ago. He was here in our county at that time. And the Farm Bureau has a big interest in county politics. And so he is coming tonight to tell us a little bit about that experience and then also some things that might be important to his organization to consider. So Brad, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Darlene. It's my pleasure to join you guys tonight. As Darlene said, my name's Bradley Yukin, and I'm the manager of the Champaign County Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau is a membership-based organization with just over 10,000 members here in the county, many of which are in the unincorporated areas of the county and the small towns across the county. The Farm Bureau, just real briefly, really focuses on 3 things: information, education, and advocacy. We do information to our members about issues that are affecting them. We work with education as it pertains to farmers are only about 2% or less of the population. So we try to have conversations and talk with consumers about what agriculture is and why we do things in agriculture. And then the last thing would be the education or the advocacy component, which would be advocacy on behalf of our members on the county level, the state and national level for that matter. But tonight I want to, Darlene's right to hit a couple points. County government and specifically the county board are especially important to Farm Bureau and our members. Unlike our urban neighbors who have city police or town or city council who respond to their needs, the county and the county board are our form of local government. The decisions that the county board makes impacts our police protection and the zoning that regulates our farmland. Decisions by the county board determine the quality of the roads that we use every day to consume services in the urban areas of the county. And these are the same roads we use to transport our crops or our members' crops to market. Additionally, the appointments the county board makes impacts on drainage, cemeteries, and fire protection districts, all of which have a large impact on our daily lives and the management of our natural resources for that matter. Decisions made by the county board directly impact our rural members is what it boils down to. With all that in mind, let me be clear though, we fully understand that the county is remarkably diverse and has a larger urban than rural population. There's no question about it. And this in itself automatically makes the process of developing a new county board map difficult as it pertains to rural representation and protecting communities of interest, as we've already talked a little bit about. So what is the Farm Bureau looking for from this advisory panel? I would say many of the same things we advocated for 10 years ago when we were part of the process of that redistricting commission. We're hoping that members of the panel step back from their personal political views and take into consideration the big picture, the future of our county and all of its residents. We urge the panel not to consider voting patterns, voting records, past election results, party affiliation, incumbency, or other such political factors in reviewing and analyzing or adopting a reapportionment map. Districts need to be compact and contiguous. We'd ask that the process is open to the public, with the public open houses or online forums for citizens to see the work of the panel, including the maps under consideration. Allowing for public comment at your meetings would be important. Finally, providing an opportunity for the public to submit their ideas or even maps for consideration by the panel. Work to protect areas of interest. As we talked, as an example, with all redistricting maps being based on equal population, in each district, you're gonna have some urban population will be automatically drawn into a rural area and vice versa, but limit those occurrences as much as possible. I don't think it's possible to draw a map where you're gonna keep all the urban in certain districts and all rural in others. It's just not possible. And obviously, we want to encourage you to follow state and federal laws as it pertains to redistricting. This all sounds easy, right? Well, of course it's not. However, if the panel were to follow these principles, we can say that the new map is fair to all citizens, was open and a transparent process, was a less political process than both parties have completed in the past, and was a good government approach to redistricting. I just want to say thanks to each of you for agreeing to serve. And as I said, it won't be an easy process. I do encourage you to look back at the resolution that was adopted 10 years ago that governed the commission at that time. While a lot has changed in the last decade, the timelines for presenting maps to the county board were commendable. The criteria that the Regional Planning Commission used in analyzing each map was rock solid, and some fabulous work was done by the RPC at that time. Specifically though, some of the measurements they used for measuring compactness was really fascinating, that they put each map through. It was pretty incredible. The process used 10 years ago was good and can be this time around as well. Again, I want to say thanks for letting me to share some thoughts tonight on behalf of the Farm Bureau, and we look forward to being part of the process. And if anybody has questions, I'm more than willing to take those.
Hey, any questions for Brad? Anything else you want?
Brad, the last time, I think 22 maps were put together by one group or another. And Farm Bureau had at least one of those. Do you anticipate something like that happening this time?
I would hope. I mean, Darlene kind of made me go back through my files and look back on 10 years ago. I've slept a lot since then. And so it was interesting to get those files out and to go through and look that individuals, you think of who in the world could draw a map. There were individuals that submitted maps that the Redistricting Commission looked at with the help of the RPC. I would like to think that this panel would open it up to the community to submit their ideas, or at least be open and ask for their input. But yes, Lynn, I would anticipate that individuals and groups might submit sample maps to the committee to consider. if at the very least, those maps maybe offers a different perspective on what could be done.
Okay, we've talked about that, Bradley, at our last meeting and had a demonstration of a mapping tool that potentially could allow there to be public maps drawn. And we're trying to consider the purchase of that right now. So we'll see how that goes, but there's options that only allow one person to draw the maps and then the public just has input. And there's other options that are obviously more expensive that would allow the public to actually draw maps. So we're trying to take a look at both of those.
Yeah, I think the last time the RPC, a bulk of the maps came from the RPC. Don't get me wrong. And obviously they had the software and the technology to do that. And they took input from the committee at that time, or individuals during public comment period would toss something out and the committee would say, hey, that's kind of a neat idea. Could we see something that maybe meets that criteria or request? And then sometimes when that map would be drawn and shown to the committee, they would be like, I don't think that'll work, for whatever reason. But it was interesting to see that and to see the various maps that were drawn and some of the ideas that were out there.
Yeah. And I think I've shared with you what the process we're doing right now is just having a few people come and talk to us that I know have specific interest in this, maybe have a variety of viewpoints and have some experience in the past, which you have, that can, share with our group, getting us oriented and started on this. Some of our group have had previous experiences and many have not. So
Right.
we're trying to just get ourselves up to speed about what kinds of things we need to look at and that sort of thing. So appreciate very much you coming tonight and sharing your experience. And obviously your group is welcome to participate in public participation as well. We will have some public hearings as well.
Darlene, I just had one question for Brad real quick. Hi, Bradley. I just was curious to know, thinking about it from the rural farm with the Farm Bureau in mind. Ideally, when you're thinking about like mapping, what types of needs would your particular group be interested that map would hold? Thinking about it from a voting perspective and a more broader perspective.
Right. Well, I think it gets back to the communities of interest is really a big subject, but yet it's very difficult to meet. I mean, I looked back at some notes and I think from 10 years ago, and I think I found some notes that said the RPC was able to identify how many times that community of interest sort of got broken apart, where it was a lot rural and then urban got put into it. And I think one of the best maps that was drawn, and I'd have to look back if it was the one selected, it had community of interest kind of 4 different times. It kind of broke that mold. And if you look at the current map, you can kind of see where some of those are at. You can kind of see where a couple of the rural districts come in and take up parts of Urbana, or Urbana goes out into the rural area. You would argue that there's where some community of interest was broken, right? When you've got the likes of St. Joe, Ogden, and Homer, and then all of a sudden you've got parts of Urbana. And I'm not saying that that's fair. I'm just saying that's the way it is. Unfortunately, with the population that we have, the rural areas, anything outside of Champaign, Urbana, and Savoy is going to be very difficult to just leave whole because they outweigh the rest of the county. And that's a fact. And it's really not going to change, right? We're not going to see a decrease in population in Champaign and Urbana and an increase in the rural areas. Whether we like that or not, we're not going to go backwards. That's just not going to happen. And so you're going to have that, but it's a matter of how many times do you put that in those districts? Again, I think 4 times was the best that they did on this 11-person map. So that's less than 50% of the time they kind of kept urban together. Or more than 50% of the time, I said that backwards, more than 50% of the time, they kind of kept the urban together, and then small town rural was kind of kept together over 50% of the time. So I think that's one of the things that you look at is that who's that fair to when you've got the likes of St. Joe, Ogden, and Homer going into Urbana. is that fair to either side? Because is that group that's in Urbana, is that fair to them that they're lumped in with a bunch of rural small towns and the small towns are lumped in with Urbana? I don't know. That's something you have to look at. But I think and that was something the RPC at the time looked at a lot, was how many times that kind of area of interest was held together and how many times it was really kind of broken apart a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
So you're defining, Brad, community of interest being geography, rural, urban? Is that what you're saying, are the communities of interest that you're considering there? Is
Well,
it rural, urban?
I know Lynn talked a lot about communities of interest, or mentioned it, I should say, at least, and his comments dealt with, roads and things like that. And I agree with that. Sometimes someone that lives in the urban area may not be as concerned about a bridge that the county has to replace, but by golly, that bridge is pretty darn important for the people that get over it every day out in the unincorporated area. So, I mean, I guess on a very fundamental or very basic level, I would say, yeah, I would lump small town, rural, and then you kind of have Champaign, Urbana, and Savoy are
Okay.
kind of two separate groups of community of interest. Now we can then do subcategories, and I think that's maybe where a lot of Lynn's 10 other groups come together. But I think that would be the more basic, would be the kind of Muhammad, St. Joe, Rantoul, and the unincorporated areas. And then on the other side would be Champaign, Urbana, and Savoy.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion thoughts here while Brad's here with us? Go ahead and speak up.
It's an exciting process, but yet I will say, just Darlene, your group, and I know just a couple of you, your group is no different than what it was 10 years ago. That was a group of citizens that was pulled together that had never, ever worked on redistricting and had a huge learning curve. So don't feel bad wherever you're at. It was the same way 10 years ago to get to where we ended up at. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. I'll make the same offer to you. You're welcome to sit through the rest of our meeting if you'd like to do that. If not,
Thanks,
thank you for being here. Okay. And our next person to speak tonight is going to be Gabe Lewis. He is part of our group, actually. Gabe is our member that's the most knowledgeable maybe about the census and where the census is at right now. And so Gabe was going to talk to us a little bit about that piece of the census collection for this year. Go ahead, Gabe.
All right, thanks, Darlene. Good evening. Can everyone see the Census 2020 screen?
Yeah, it's up.
Great. Okay, well, you may or may not know some of this information, so I'll try not to bore you or knock you out too much with all that's here, but just wanted to bring you up to speed a little bit with what I know, what's been going on a lot of the last year. Overall, actually, the Census Bureau has a new data website, data.census.gov, but they do surveys every year, if you're not aware, in between the 10-year head count, and that's called the American Community Survey, so ACS. And they produce 5-year and 1-year estimates. A lot of times we look at the 5-year estimates because it's a bigger sample size, which lets us look at smaller geographies. So that's really every geography in our county except for the county itself in Champaign. And I'm going to show you some numbers in a bit. We also track some of these factors annually. So we have what we call our community indicators, and we're starting to migrate that to our regional data portal. Just to give you an idea of geographies, because I know this is something Darlene asked about, the census provides information at different areas. So obviously for states and counties, places, which are municipalities. And then this is going from largest to smallest. We have tracts and then block groups and blocks. So when that data is released, a lot of times it may be better to look at the data for census tract to get that kind of statistically significant data, or we may be able to look at a smaller geography like the block groups or blocks. I just wanted to give you an idea of some population trends. So this is one of our indicators. We look at Illinois and then some of our peer counties in central Illinois. And I pulled the 2010 census numbers and then our latest ACS numbers from 2019. So obviously we don't have that 2020 data yet, but I put in red which areas are declining and in green which are increasing. So again, you may be aware Champaign County is growing. It's one of the areas in Illinois that is growing. We're seeing a 4.4% population increase generally over those last 9 years. And McLean County too, home to Illinois State. The state of Illinois is losing population, and then Macon, Peoria, and Sangamon counties have a little bit less population, but we'll get a better idea when we get those 2020 census numbers. And don't be threatened by the list, but these are all of our municipalities in Champaign County. So again, you can see where they're in red if a community has a decrease, and most of these are the smaller communities. So even Ogden lost 1 resident. That's a very small decrease, but it may not be a huge decrease, but you can see that it may be just kind of staying the same generally. And then in green are areas with growing populations or just an increase from 2010. I did sort this table in the next 2 slides, so you'll see here which communities are gaining population. Again, just to give you an idea, in terms of the absolute numbers, Champaign has gained the most population, over 6,000 residents, maybe not too much of a surprise, followed by Urbana, Savoy, Mahomet, Rantoul, and St. Joseph. And then the next slide just sorts it by the percent population change. So when you look at that, actually Savoy, Mahomet, and St. Joe are at the top of the list in terms of the number of the percentage of residents that they've gained over the last 9 years. Wanted to go a little chronologically here. What was happening with the 2020 census? Even back to 2019, RPC and a lot of community leaders were gearing up for this census. It was the first digital census in terms of you could fill out the form online, but we were working on education. March 9th, the census form opened, and March 11th, the global pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization. So we had a lot of changes, probably the most notable one being the university asking its students to go home, and those students really need to be counted here. So there was a lot of concern, and there was efforts made as much as we could to have people fill out their forms for their campus address, but we'll have to see what the results of that were. The original deadline to complete the census form was July 31st, and that was extended. In the summer and the fall, when it was a little safer, we were out in the community and other community partners doing in-person assistance. But again, that was still limited. And then in September, the deadline kept changing about when people could finish submitting their form. And so that also created some confusion. If originally it was October 31st, then there was September 30th. They landed on October 15th. So we hope that everyone completed or submitted their form by that point. Moving into 2021, we're waiting. We'll have some geographic products that'll be released for Illinois in February. They're releasing different batches of states at a time. And then the final 2 deadlines have been, again, extended or at least not met. So by the end of the December, they were supposed to process the apportionment counts, and that's been moved back to March or April. March 6th would be the earliest we would get any numbers for the states in terms of population numbers. And then to process all the redistricting data, the Census Bureau originally had a March 31st deadline, and we're looking at the spring or summer. To give you an idea too of what they're working with, the Census Bureau typically has had 20 or more weeks to process all of the data. And if they were to have submitted all the numbers by December 31st, they would have only had 11 weeks. So, you know, they're working hard on it, but there's only so much they can do. They have to do quality controls to make sure that the data is as legitimate as possible. These next 3 slides, this is information we presented before, and maybe this will enlighten you about the population, the fabric of our county. There are a lot of different types of populations that were considered hard to count. And these percentages on the slide show what percentage that is in Champaign County. So young children under 5, the 6% of the county. Young and mobile, that high school and college population is 27% of the county. Over age 85 is 1.4%. Folks that are earning 100% or below the poverty level are at 21% of the county. People of color, we have 6% are Hispanic, 14% are Black, and 11% of our county is Asian. 12% of our county is foreign born, and 4% are in a limited English speaking household. 12% moved from an outside county in the past year. 4% of adults over 25 are not a high school graduate. 6% of the workforce are unemployed, but 45% are renter occupied housing units. So that's a big portion of our county. We were looking at vacant housing units. That was something that for census outreach, as well as large and overcrowded households and the non-family households. That particular number is almost half, which would be attributed to a lot of students, I would say, living together in a lot of renter households. And then we also looked at populations without internet access for doing the census form. Another nice feature of this last census was that we were able to get self-response rates in real time through the Census Bureau website. And these are the final numbers from the Census Bureau. And what you'll see then is that this isn't 100%. For the remaining households that didn't respond themselves to the form, that's where the Census Bureau went back and completed the visits. The census takers would go and get the forms filled out. But this just kind of gives you an idea of that your own participation, how many people were engaged, I guess. For the whole country, we're looking at 2/3, 67%. For Illinois, 71.4% of people filled it out on their own, which was number 7 out of all the states, so that was good. Champaign County had 68.6% of residents do self-response. City of Champaign had 64.9%, and Urbana 67%. You'll notice on the right, there aren't street labels, but this is zoomed in. This is a map of the census tracts of self-response. And we're zoomed in here basically to the University District. All of the orange parcels are 50% or less. And so the dark orange is really closer to 30% of self-response. And that's the University District, particularly in Champaign, looking Gregory Drive, Wright Street, the railroad on the left, and points further north. So this was, again, why we're concerned about what kind of data we're going to get for university students. The other area here is the north side of Champaign and Urbana, Prospect Avenue here on the left side, and then Broadway Avenue and these points in between. Just to round out the list, 71.6% of Savoy households did self-response, 65.1% of Rantoul households, and then Mahomet and St. Joe had the highest at 81.4% and 85.2% respectively. And so I'm gonna conclude here with a few considerations to be aware of. It's not to be pessimistic, but just realistic. I mentioned this university student either confusion or lack of awareness about where to complete their forms. That's always been an issue, but with the university telling people to go home, we know that students did stay on campus in their apartments, but you know, they needed to make sure that they filled out their form for here. And we really didn't see a lot of students in person until the beginning of the fall semester when we tried to be outside on campus. There was confusion for foreign-born residents in terms of if they even knew they had to fill out the form, and then the talk about the citizenship question, which did not end up on the form, but we knew that people may be leery of filling out the form if they were being asked about their citizenship. COVID-19 delaying the census taker visits, and then really just the timeline being kind of shortened for that work, that they may not have been able to go back to a household as many times as they normally would have. So they could have done 6 visits, but maybe they only did 3. And even if these issues don't affect the quality of the data, I think it's important for all of us to be aware that the public may question the data because of that. So when the data comes out, hopefully it's as, good, and, we see some kind of consistent trends, but I think that's something that everyone should be aware of, that the public may question that. And we have to work with the data available. There's been questions about doing future special censuses, but that's not necessarily an easy task, and it's not going to happen before this committee needs to work to finish the redistricting. So hopefully we'll have some good quality data. So that's what I have tonight. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Gabe about the census work. Lynn, are you talking?
Yeah, Gabe, if I were undocumented, I would be real nervous about filling out a form and signing it. But those are important people. They're part of the terrific workforce here in the county, doing lots of good things. How do you try to get a handle on how many of those people are actually here?
My first thought is we were working with the Refugee Center of East Central Illinois, as well as the University YMCA, which is home to the New American Welcome Center. So they definitely have a close connection with some of those folks, the clients they serve. That would be my first go-to in terms of if we're starting to look at data and we may think this doesn't look right, to see what they think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Recently in the lame duck session of the Illinois legislature and in other venues, they brought up the process of who do you count if they're temporary. Specifically, they were talking about prisoners. For example, in my hometown of Lincoln, Illinois, they have a prison, and the prison is mainly populated with people from Cook County. The question was, since they're temporary residences, where should they really be counted? And there is a push to count them in Cook County now instead of Logan County, which is currently the way it's done. Students might fall into the same category. Have you heard anything about how this year's census count, given the fact that the people in the state legislature are leaning towards considering a different way than we currently consider people that are temporary?
That's a good question. I know in our packet we had information about the prison population counts, and as far as I know, they would be counted in the county where the prison is until that changes, if the state decides to change that. But I haven't heard anything about changing where students would be counted. It's always been that they would be counted in their campus community. The issue is just that the students don't always realize that, especially if they went home during the beginning of the pandemic and their parents just counted them there and none of them were the wiser. I will say anyone living in dorms, university housing or Greek housing or private certified housing are actually counted by the university. So there's a direct count sent from the university to the Census Bureau, and that was done this summer. A separate issue with that is the numbers and the names go to the Census Bureau, but there's some privacy laws that restrict the university from sending like the demographic information. So, I mean, I think we could understand that they would be young people, but we may not get information about race for all those people, for example, but those numbers were sent by the university, so we at least have that.
I think it's a very interesting topic. Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Welcome.
There be other populations like that, Gabe? I'm not sure, like, I'm thinking of people that are in homeless shelters or people that are maybe at the jail. So it's not prison, but they're just there for short times.
Yeah, so what they call group quarters would be things like prisons, colleges or universities, nursing homes, that mental institutions, forgive me if I'm not using the correct terminology for that, but someplace institutions where people live, they participate in that program where they send their information directly to the Census Bureau. So at least that's hopefully a more efficient way of getting some of those larger populations counted. The homeless, people experiencing homelessness, there was a count on the street and also working with the like See You at Home and service providers. The Census Bureau worked directly with those organizations to get people experiencing homelessness counted.
Okay. So it's potentially, just for those of you that might not be aware, they use the census count for other kinds of things, both at the federal level and the state level as well. And so there's kind of sometimes, I would say, a conflict of who should be counted where, because if you count the person in your county, you are eligible for that percentage of federal funds that get divided up by state and county. Which of course counties would like to have as much of that as possible if it's funding. But if you're counting for other reasons, you might not want there to be those people counted in your county, such as, I don't know about the prison population or how those kinds of things. So it could be with different kinds of reasons that they collect the census data. There would be a difference about whether you'd like to count more people or you wouldn't like to count more people. And that's why I guess that's why we just say we're using the number we got, and we just count who's there at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gabe.
Thanks.
And then the last person that I had invited to do some work with us just to share information was Barb Mann. She's with the State's Attorney's Office. She's the Chief Assistant State's Attorney for the Civil Division. And her staff has gone through the law to talk about the schedule that we have to keep in order to meet the legal requirements. And she did there's a nice handout for that was sent to you today. So I'm not gonna she didn't come to the meeting, so I'm not gonna have her go through that, but you can read that and see what the schedule is. The only caveat to that, of course, will be if, for example, they decide that they're going to not accept the final census numbers until well into that schedule, the whole state will have to reschedule, and there'll have to be legislation to say that it's delayed for this year. I know that there's other states that have elections going on before Illinois, and I was like Virginia, for example, is one of the early ones I was told, and so they've already done legislation to delay their process by which they do redistricting because their elections are happening pretty soon. So that's a possibility, and I will keep my ears open for that, as will the State's Attorney's Office, I'm sure. And then Gabe will keep us posted on when we get the final census information. But that's the only change. So we just are going to move forward that is our schedule, unless we hear otherwise. The state legislature would have to make that change statewide if we were not going to do it that way. So just to let you know. So anything else we need to talk about from our presenters tonight, or that you want to bring up? Okay, seeing nothing else. What I'd like to say is that I will send out shortly after this meeting, I'll send out another doodle poll for our next meeting. I hope to have in approximately, I would say 3 weeks, maybe 4 at the most. Give us a little reading material in the interim, and also would like you to think about an exercise that I want to do in terms of discussion at our next meeting. So we're going to start to talk about the criteria that we're going to use. And as we know from our various points, there are certain things that we're required to do, but we decide how much variability we'd like to have in that. And so we need to think about those criteria, for example, how compact, and then how much variability would we like to have. I will share with you, if I haven't done so already, the rules that were given to the committee 10 years ago, which was an independent commission, so that you can see what they used to start with. And also what the law is about those things. There's limits to some of them that about how far off you can get. So there's specific rules about that. And the ones to be considered, of course, are how compact. They have to be contiguous. We're talking about communities of interest. And so with communities of interest, I would also like you to start thinking about and send to Megan the communities of interest that you think we might want to consider. What are the areas? Like we talked tonight about rural urban. We talked about various minorities, or just can minorities be lumped together as a group? All, those kinds of things that we need to start thinking about. So if you would give your list of possible communities of interest, and please talk to people that you're familiar with outside of this group. You all have different spheres of influence and friends and things like that that you communicate with in between our meetings. And so, you can gather input that way as well. And we try to get a list together of what we might like to consider. So that's our exercise for homework. And I will have Megan send out a note to you about that, along with the doodle poll for when we'd like to have our next meeting. I'm hoping for like maybe the 3rd or 4th week in February. And we can meet again to talk about those things. By that time, we might have some input from the county board about what they're looking at in terms of districts. And if I do get any information from that, I'll bring that back to you at the next meeting as well. Are there anything else, any other things that you guys think you need in the interim to consider?
Darlene, Brian Gaines has considerable number of years experience working with these kinds of things. I was wondering if he has some particular papers that he might share with us to help us with stuff like communities of interest. Or
yeah, I think that'd be great. Okay. Brian, do you have anything like that you could share with the group? Not a whole course of reading. I know that might be difficult for you.
I could put together a syllabus, but no, I do. I've written some myself, but I could also try to find nice summaries and keep it to stuff that's written for a general population that's not an election law journal necessarily and is highly technical, but it's
okay. Yeah, I'd appreciate that approach. If you could.
So I'll look for that. I will say that compactness is in particular is one where I think Brad mentioned that he was impressed with the compactness analysis in the last time, but there's I would say that there's the least consensus in how best to measure compactness. There are lots of competing, mildly complicated mathematical models. Courts have never really said this is the right way. So I think compactness is an easy thing it's simple shapes. But once you say, how do you measure simple shapes? It turns out to be surprisingly complicated. I think communities of interest has a different kind of complexity to it because it's just subjectively people will disagree on whether something or other is a community. But compactness, it turns into a technical debate very quickly. But anyway, I'm happy to try to scare up a sort of simple summary kind of readings.
The other thing would be, I know we're supposed to keep the populations equal in each district, and there could be the question is how much flexibility do we want to allow to that? So it might be, I think Wayne was talking about trying to keep them as close as possible to 0. And I know that in some cases, I think the districts, were up to maybe 10% last time because they were trying to consider some of the other factors. So it's those kinds that we just need to figure out what our criteria are going to be. So I think we need to see what the choices are, or at least some of the choices, and talk to our own areas of influence. And if there's anybody else that you think you'd like to have come and talk to the group, please also make that suggestion. And then I will also start to be thinking about when we should do some public hearings, because I do think the public in general needs to have an opportunity to speak. If we want to just do it at this meeting and have public participation time, we need actually to have an official meeting for that purpose. I'll try to think about that as well going forward. So I think our next meeting will be maybe in about 3 weeks. That sound good to everybody? And it seems like Tuesdays and Thursdays work the best for folks. So as you might know, the county board meetings are also on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. So I'll schedule around the weeks of those so that I'm not trying to be in 2 places at once. But I think those 2 nights seem to be working the best for us going forward. So any objection to either Tuesdays or Thursdays? Okay, good. All right. Anything else before we close tonight? All right, very much appreciate your time. You guys have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Night.